Last week, we spent the bulk of our show paying tribute to the life of Graham Thorpe, who passed away at the age of 55. On Sunday evening, in an interview in The Times between Michael Atherton and Thorpe's wife Amanda and daughters Kitty and Emma, they revealed that Thorpe's death was a suicide following a battle with depression and anxiety. It's a moving, important piece, and I'd encourage people to read it, but just reading out a few quotes. His wife Amanda said, "We supported him as a family, and he tried many, many treatments, but unfortunately none of them really seemed to work. Graham was renowned as someone who was very mentally strong on the field and he was in good physical health. But mental illness is a real disease and can affect anyone. Despite having a wife and 2 daughters whom he loved and who loved him, he did not get better." And his daughter Kitty said, "He had loved life and he loved us, but he just couldn't see a way out. It was heartbreaking to see how withdrawn he had become. He was not the same person. It was strange to see this person trapped in the body of Dad. That's why I've been so happy that the many reflections have been about his life before this illness took over. I'm glad that's how everyone does remember him, rightly so, as the complete character he was." Phil.
Yeah, how courageous and brave and composed and dignified can you possibly be as 3 broken-hearted women who have managed to summon something important from the wreckage of their heartbreak. I'm glad is obviously not the right word, but I'm gratified for the game. I think that they have had the courage to speak to Atherton about this, and for it to become part of the public discussion and public remembrance of him. I think while they're absolutely right to say that they want the full story, the full character to be remembered, the tragic circumstances around how he went can still potentially be used to move that conversation down the line a little bit further. And it's a conversation which has been had more and more in recent years, but it was a conversation that was never had among men of all ages, of all backgrounds, from people who have been very successful and people who have been, in inverted commas, less successful. But the story of men's mental health has become so vast that it has to be acknowledged as much as possible, because it's a vicious and brutish and indiscriminate killer, especially to men around Thorpe's age. I think it's the second most common cause of death for men between the ages of 40 and 50, or certainly along those lines. And look, people were in the game, who were inside the game, were aware of the circumstances around what happened in 2022 and aware of what happened last week, although not the specifics of it. And it became hard to discuss it on podcasts and to write about it in places. And you could see how difficult it was for people who knew him closely, with Mark on the TV last week, and Atherton and Nasser and so on, people who were really close to him. You can see how difficult it was, because there was, horrifying as it is, there was another element to this story that last week wasn't discussed and 2 years ago wasn't discussed. And obviously that's fine and right, because that would have been the family's wishes, of course. But that they've summoned that kind of courage now to come out and speak about this. And there's no self-pity at all in any of those quotes. They want the full story to be, his life to be celebrated and his death to be discussed, and the circumstances around it. And I think that's an incredibly powerful and moving thing for the family to have been able to do. And it can only result from this horror in making people's private and internal challenges slightly less private. And if it can help just a handful of people, even a smidgen, even if it moves the dial just a few notches for a handful of people, because somebody so prominent, so successful, so loved, so respected, had hit the wall and couldn't see past it. If that can resonate with anyone, wherever they are in their own personal stories, then from this horror, some kind of kernel of beauty or truth can be extracted from it. And look, I thank the family for doing it. How brave can you possibly be?
Now, onto the main show. As far as sporting rivalries go, it doesn't get much bigger than Australia v England in the Ashes. Whether you're looking for a once-in-a-lifetime cricket holiday in Australia, a tour with friends, or an Ashes series ticket package, Gulliver's Sports Travel will have you covered. Make sure you're with Gulliver's Down Under to see Ben Stokes' England bring the urn home. Head to gulliverstravel.co.uk and register your interest to be the first to find out when Gullivers go on sale with their fantastic Ashes ticket, hotel and travel options. Speaking of Ben Stokes, he's now a major doubt for England Test series against Sri Lanka after injuring his hamstring in the Ruddy 100. Here with me to discuss the potential impact of that injury on England's Test plans, this year's 100 more generally, and the rest of the story from the week in cricket are Phil, as you've heard from, and Matt Roller. Matt, good to have you back on. How have you been?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Ben. Always enjoy coming and getting on the show. Yeah, very well. Thank you. I'm sort of, it feels like this is probably one of the very few times between now and the end of the year that England's men won't be playing cricket somewhere in the world. And yet it's still a pretty busy time with obviously 100 games every single day, every single minute of every single day, it feels like sometimes. And very, very quickly interrupted Sunday evening learning that watching Ben Stokes hobble off with the support of two of the Northern Superchargers medical staff and quite possibly jeopardise the rest of his season.
Yeah, so we don't know, do we yet? I think you said the scan's tomorrow?
Yeah, we think the scan's going to be Tuesday, and presumably it'll come out pretty quickly after that. But
when you are carried off, that doesn't look like a grade 1, but who can say? It might be. But even if it is a grade 1, then he misses that first test at least, you'd think.
I reckon so. I'm not a doctor, but I think the sight of him on crutches shaking hands with players after that game suggests that he's pretty unlikely, I would speculate, to play in that first test, and I would guess probably fairly unlikely to play in the series. I guess there's also the element of why would you rush Stokes back given all the work that he's done over the past however long when there is such a busy itinerary of test cricket. England, I think the first test against Pakistan for a 3-match series that again is pretty tight time frame is something like October the 6th or 7th. Then there's a short break after that tour and then they're in New Zealand again, so there's 9 tests in the next 3.5 months, so and if you're going to miss 3 of them as Stokes, you're probably going to choose the most winnable looking ones, which are Sri Lanka at home rather than the 6 overseas.
So what we do know is at least not his knee. I think when he went down clutching the back of his knee, we sort of feared the worst. It was that injury that he had surgery on to fix that had gone again, but no, it's his hamstring. We don't yet know the full extent of it, but Phil, assuming he is out for that first test at least, what do England do?
Okay, so we have a squad with Jordan Cox brought in, Daniel Lawrence obviously still in the squad with Zach Crawley's absence and all the noises that Lawrence might open the batting.
Correct.
Which is, great and funny and unhinged and all of that. Ollie Pope will be captain because, Bazball's not that cheeky. So the big moment for him, when you think about where he was a couple of years ago, and he wasn't under pressure coming into this summer, but he came in needing runs, having started really slowly and batted really beautifully at times in the West Indies series, and now he's going to be walking out with the blazer and the coin. Big moments for a likable cricketer, very likable cricketer. I would assume, top of my head stuff, Cox comes in at 6. No, I wouldn't. No, I would assume that they'll move Jamie Smith up to 6 and bring Wokes up to 7. What would be my guess? I don't know. I'm making it up as I go. I haven't considered
I think those are
for
two
a
choices,
moment.
aren't they? You either play the extra batter, which is Cox, which is, so to answer that question, that's what I think they probably will do, because when Stokes is that's a guess, but when Stokes was sort of half fit last summer, obviously they did change it during the Ashes, but I would say for most of that window when Stokes hasn't been bowling fit, they've generally backed full bowlers to get the job done. Like in India this year, they often went with that.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah.
So I would guess they might do that and then rely a bit on Root and Lawrence as second spinners.
Because if they didn't have any occasionals in their top 5 or 6, then question. You wouldn't want to go into what's going to be hot, challenging with with Wood, who's an out-and-out quick, and you don't want to bowl in more than a dozen overs a day at most. So you'd be asking for trouble, I think, to go in just with a 4.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, with Lawrence gives you that.
I guess the alternative is I think Smith at 6, Wokes at 7, and then Potts is probably a spot higher at number 8, but I reckon he could do a job. And I also think Potts is someone that, you know, if they just pick the 3 quicks, they'll probably at least start with Wokes, Wood, and Atkinson again. They might rotate through the series, but from what we've seen so far this summer, maybe they won't. And I think it might be quite almost a fudge way of being able to learn a bit more about another seamer if you pick a 4th quick. So I would be tempted to go down that route of having Smith at 6, Wokes 7, Potts 8, which does, you know, leave you with a longish tail. But, you know, Potts down the line, Potts will be a contender. England need a number 8 for that Ashes series. Obviously, you know, I don't want to get too obsessed with the Ashes, but if he's a genuine option to bat 8, and, you know, I can't really see Wokes playing in that series on that tour.
Do you know what, as well? Sure, Wokes is, you know, half a place too high at 7, and Potts is a place and a half too high at 8, but they've only got one number 11 in the team, haven't they? You know, but Bashir is a proper number 11, or authentic number 11. But 9, 10, Wood, Atkinson,
could
either
both be
order,
9s.
They're both useful players. And so while it looks like a longish tail, it's a depthful tail.
Does 3 9s make an 8 to 10?
Right,
Maybe it does. I don't know.
There you go. So however they go, I don't think it impinges too much on the balance of the side. Yeah, I don't know. They're the 2 options. It will be, from a punter's point of view, I'd like to see Cox in there. And I imagine they might like to see him as well. As they say, you know, so much of this is, sure, it's the here and now, but it's also tomorrow and down the line. Raised eyebrow or 2 that he was picked, although we discussed it last week, and excellent young player. Yeah, so perhaps they might learn a bit more from having Cox take a cap or 2. But however they spin it, when you lose one of these big players, obviously it affects the overall potency of your team, but it does make it slightly more exciting, doesn't it? Right? Because you can kind of talk about it, really. Yeah. You know, no one wants anything to happen to the big dogs, and in the really, really, really big. If this was Brisbane next week, then you'd be going, "Oh, Christ's sake!" But as it is, it does kind of open things up a little bit. Just on the Lawrence thing, very briefly, I feel like caught me on the hop last week, and I was sort of too dismissive, and you know, I don't think he's an opener, and I don't think anyone truly believes that he's an opener. But the one thing I would add that I didn't add last week is that when he went to Australia 3 or 4 years ago, playing for the Lions, and he batted in the top 4 for sure, it might have even been 3, certainly in the top 4, and he was unplayable because his game suited that kind of style, you know, decent off the back foot, punches nicely through the covers, not a massive amount of lateral movement. And he batted for a long time and made big hundreds against Australia A and a select 11 as well, and was the star player on that tour. And so I'm just adding that as a tiny caveat on the Lawrence suddenly in the top order thing, that if they can find that he can offer an option as a reserve top order player, not as a first choice but as a reserve, then if it's ever going to work for him, you sense that it might be in Australia, and so perhaps there's an element there of their thinking.
Also, you mentioned,
what do you think about it?
Well, you mentioned Pope and adding to the intrigue of the series potentially. I'm fascinated to see what that's like as Pope as captain. I think he's done one first-class game, which I think was the one where they got about 700, and Glamorgan also got about 700 here at, you know, end of season, proper nothing game, really. Yeah. So he's got effectively no first-class experience doing it. He's obviously done it a bit in T20, but not a lot. And he's obviously had these little periods of doing it when Stokes is nipped off for a wee or whatever, but almost nothing to write home about. And I still can't, for the life of me, work Pope out really as a player generally. Like, obviously the India tour was such a high and then a prolonged low. Even this summer, I think, having looked in really good touch and scored a good 100 against the West Indies, he's now averaging 7 across 5 games in the 100, which is probably pretty irrelevant. But if he comes into the first test off the back of 5 or 6 single figure scores in the past 2 weeks, it's not going to be full of confidence. And I can't really work out whether he'll sort of be doing a Ben Stokes impression or whether he has his own ideas, whether he has his own personality as a captain, a style as a captain from so little experience. I think it'll be really interesting.
I wonder if with Ollie Pope, they do these surveys, how prime ministerial does someone seem? And if they do it before an election, it always shoots up right after someone gets elected and actually becomes prime minister. I wonder if Ollie Pope almost won't see.
We need to see him in the blazer, don't we?
Test captain until we see him in the blazer, and then it'll kind of all make sense and click. I don't know. Two things I'd add on the discussion about who replaces Stokes. I think who the spinner is, given it's now Bashir, might come into it a little bit.
Oh, I don't think there's much in it. I think he bowls fine.
But he probably bowls more better balls and more worse balls as well. Yeah. He probably has a bigger range than Leach is probably more of a day 1-2.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
Perhaps. Yeah.
That's my take anyway.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing as well is, they won't do this, so it's almost not even worth saying, but they could just play 4 quick
we discussed that
bowlers
before Lords,
from
didn't we, in the
8 downwards, and then you have, Dan Lawrence as your second spinner, or it's Dan Lawrence as your spinner, and then you've also got Joe Root there to bowl a few overs. What I mean, they won't do that, but
can I say the thing that no one's dared to say yet? Sam Curran, vibe selection, 3 good 100 games, 4 good 100 games. Why not just roll with it? I don't really see it happening, but if a few years ago we were talking about a Ben Stokes replacement, you'd say, well, they don't need one because they've already got Sam Curran in the team who balances it, so that's fine. He'll bat 7. I don't really see it happening. He's hardly bowled a red ball in anger in 2.5 years, but
yeah, that's it.
Matt, speaking of the 100, we've had a few questions about Stokes' involvement in it in the first place. I kind of think it's kind of easy to have quite a lot of hindsight with these things. I mean, he looked pretty fit during that West Indies series, as fit as he has in a long time, and by all accounts, he was himself quite keen to play it, right? So is it fine, or are people right to be annoyed at the 100 for this too?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I suppose the argument against it would be that he didn't play in the Blast, he didn't play in the T20 World Cup specifically so he could get in perfect shape for the test. If you were devising it simply from a performance point of view, maybe he would have had this as a period of rest, but you also probably wouldn't have devised it as 3 back-to-back tests with a 3-week gap in the middle. And from the ECB's point of view, yeah, they've incentivized England's test players to play in it. Stokes is only about 15-20 grand a game, I think, prorated for the 100 because he's on 125 grand across 8 that's then averaged down. So, he's making a nice amount of money from it, not a life-changing amount of money from it for Ben Stokes, but still useful to have. And he's also, in theory at least, in a dressing room with Harry Brook, who's a new captain, with Andrew Flintoff, who's a potential sort of medium-term England coach. There's got to be some sort of off-field benefits from it, as well as the whole marketing side of selling tickets and finally getting this star player back in the 100 for the first time in 3 years. But yeah, I mean, he could have done that in the gym. He could have done it, doing shuttle runs or doing some intervals training.
Instead, he does it in the jinxed 100.
Instead, he does it in the cursed 100 wearing Pop Chips purple. But yeah, I do like the idea that somewhere out there there's a Northern Superchargers fan. There's a kid whose only exposure to cricket so far is going to watch Northern Superchargers, and he thinks Stokes is this overrated fraud because he's seen him bat 4 times. He's seen him nick off. He's seen him get bowled by a beauty from Tim Southey, and his hero is Graham Clark, who he thinks should be in the 11 instead of him. Personally, I think it's one of those freak things that it looks rubbish when it happens, and I can see how if you were angry about the 100's existence, you would be even more angry about it today.
Can you see that though? Really, you can't, can you?
You can, because people get angry about lots of things. And
yeah, but there's no justification.
Of course, there's no causation element of it. It's just something that I didn't want to happen has happened, and something that I also didn't want to happen.
Yeah,
maybe
and surely even the most skeptical and, if you like, disenfranchised, right, of cricket fans, of which there are a fair few who have no time for the 100 per se. You've got to take another leap to want it to actually collapse and blow up in your face, because the ECB stakes so much on it. There's so much riding on it. There's so much potential financial essential imperatives attached to it. And if it falls, and the ECB is considerably weakened, and if the ECB is considerably weakened, then the game itself is considerably weakened. And the trickle-down effect onto Sunday teams, onto schools, onto how much money Chance to Shine can take from the ECB. All of those kinds of sort of unseen consequences are there. So you have to want it to work. And even if you don't like the thing, you would think, no, maybe, I don't know. Tell us if I'm completely off piece there. But if you do accept that it needs to work for the future of the English game, the immediate future of the English game, then you have to want the big players to be minded to be in it, even doing us a favour. And that there is that sense of it. Okay, look, I'll give you a few games. I'm normally in Menorca in August these days, but before the Test matches, I'll give you a few games. And Root looks like he's properly invested in it, and that can only help elevate this thing. Sometimes from the slightly kind of from the mundane, it needs to be elevated sometimes, and the presence of these players is absolutely essential. You mentioned the superchargers. You do turn it on, and you see kind of like daddy legend, current legend, and future legend all playing together or sharing a dugout together, and you do think this is the kind of level that the thing needs to present itself as, right? So
it's funny actually. Some of the Superchargers games have been totally bizarre. Like there was a great lineup of players at Edgbaston last week. It was Stokes' first game. Stokes is back in.
He they ballsed up. He cleaned up for 90 odds.
He opens with Matt Short. I think Pooran and Brook were 3 and 4. Jamie Smith was back for the Phoenix. They had Southey, Milne, and Sean Abbott as their overseas.
And it was a stinker of a game.
Like, wow, here we go. This is going to be a great one.
Yeah.
I think they were 89 all out, and Phoenix chased it in 40 balls. It was
Stokes
honestly
got a first baller,
incredible. And there has been a lot of talk about that within the 100 this year about the ball's doing a lot more, maybe because it was wet early in the summer. The pitches are a bit spicier, all that stuff, but. It has just been a slightly odd season for it, I think, sort of more generally, because it sort of felt like a very slow intro to it because the players weren't there, and now the players are here. Sometimes there's still slightly underwhelming games like that one, although there have also been some really good ones.
Can I ask you? Sorry, no, go on to that.
Well, yeah. So, and I mean, to some extent, the ECB have been a bit unfortunate with the timing of some of them. Like there was a game on Saturday that I reckon probably very few people were watching because it was on a Saturday afternoon. People are doing other things on a Saturday afternoon. They're playing club cricket. They're at the pub. They're watching football because the football season's back. And Pollard hit Rashid Khan for 5 straight sixes in a set of 5, which was an unbelievable moment.
Having been 6 from 14.
Exactly. And it should have been absolutely and to be fair, it's still gone pretty big on Instagram and YouTube and all that stuff. But it didn't really feel like it sort of, I don't know, maybe this is me having a 10% better relationship with social media than I did a couple of years ago, but it didn't really feel like this huge viral moment in a way that maybe previous years it has.
Yeah, perhaps. I watched that live. I was working on it. Christ, I wouldn't have done it otherwise. But it was spectacular, and there's that sense of Pollard.
It's like gladiator cricket, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing, and there is that sense of Pollard that, he kind of retired himself 2 or 3 years ago, but why not? I'll crack on. I'll field it long on. Don't really bowl anymore that I've seen anyway. But, just catches them from nowhere with those bucket hands and has a hit without any great conviction that it's going to work, right? And it looked like that. 6 from 14. They're losing the game. Trent Rockets with Rashid Khan, and he just sends... And if he bowled him all 10, he'd have hit all 10 for 6. By the 5th one, you're thinking, there's literally no way you can bowl without him just pumping you out the ground on a massive ground as well, the biggest ground in the country. It was ridiculous. And they cruised it. Well, in fact, they didn't cruise it because then he was run out, but they got home anyway. He's
now done, because he did 6 sixes off Dhananjaya from Sri Lanka a few years ago in the T20 International. So he's now done 6 times 6, 6 in 6 and 5 in 5, where both of them have been the maximum possible.
One thing some people have been sort of asking, saying, given it has been a sort of slightly lackluster season, does that matter more this year, given, the conversations around private investment that they're trying to sell it to people who are, these people, they're going to bring these guys to grounds and have them watch games and say, this is this great thing, we can sell it to you. Does it then matter if the 100, if the stands aren't fully packed, or if the cricket is a bit underwhelming, or actually is kind of the bigger picture more important? And
I sort of think not hugely, and that's mainly because if you think about what the pitch is from the ECB or the host club or county to the investor, here's this thing that has sort of effectively been a startup. We're still very early days, but we have good crowds, which have sort of generally been the case. They've been a bit up and down at certain venues this year, but I reckon also from what I hear, most of the sort of prospective investors are generally coming to London games, which are pretty much always sold out. I think there was one at Lord's which was half full on a sort of midweek. But they're coming here, they're saying, look at this thing that we've got that is already good, but you, Mr. Investor, you're going to make it even better and bigger, and you're going to pour your money in, and that's how we take it from good to great. So it probably doesn't matter too much if it's not already great, because otherwise they'd say, well, what would be the point of me spending all my money on this? So I don't think it's hugely important. I'm sure, I'm sure the ECB would have loved it to be slightly better. I think the one possible slight concern might be that, clearly I think one of the big problems this year, sort of speaking very much to myself here, has been that it's clashed with the Olympics. And I think almost any cricket fan is going to be a fan of sport in general. And, some people love the Olympics, some people are less keen on the Olympics, but I think it still takes quite a strong dyed-in-the-wool dedication to come home one evening, flick on the telly, and rather than going for the BBC's Olympic coverage, going to 404 because you're desperate to watch Superchargers v Phoenix. I think most people will be going to the Olympics, and I think that has not helped the sense of sort of people not necessarily tracking it that closely, and the casual fans probably have been watching the Olympics because that's probably more interesting to a 100 curious person. So maybe that'll all change in the last week and people will suddenly engage with it, and maybe they'll get a great run of games that decide qualification and a good final and all that sort of thing, which can, it's a short tournament that could massively change the perception. But I would imagine that most of the TV figures have probably been down just because of that clash with the Olympics. And therefore that might not look so good if you're suddenly saying, oh, actually we had a big old dip this year compared to last. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be a huge problem, is my sense anyway.
What's the silver bullet for the 100?
I'm not sure there is one. I think the reason I think last year was good and that this year has been less good was as much sort of scheduling and what else was going on at the same time. And I think last year they didn't clash with Major League. They didn't clash with any other sort of significant T20 league, maybe a tiny bit of CPL at the end. But they basically sort of had that window. They also had players coming back from a gripping Ashes series and players who, someone like Ben Duckett, who wasn't a big name in the first 2 years of the 100, but by season 3, come and watch Ben Duckett suddenly was a big thing because they just had the Ashes. And there also was pretty much no other major sporting events going on. There was no Olympics, there was no Euros, there was no World Cup. It was a pretty free run at it. And I think that was why it felt front and centre and why it sort of felt like something that someone might mention anecdotally in the pub that you weren't expecting to, in a way that this year, if you're chatting about sport, it's probably not going to be about that. And yeah, I think the silver bullet is probably having a clear window, having loads of money so that all the best players come and actually commit to 4 weeks rather than 2.5, and having full availability of England players. But I don't necessarily know that that's going to happen anytime soon. I don't know.
I think part of my issue with the private investment and the rate at which we've kind of sped towards it is that I'm not fully convinced that the best thing for the 100 is also the best thing for English cricket, if you see what I mean, or if actually compromise is necessary on all sides. Because, as Matt says, the best 100 has, a full window for international cricket and, all the England players playing in it all the time. And at the moment, that's not the best thing that, that England's test team needs or that England's, the rest of the game in England needs. But if you have private investors in the 100, they're not going to care about the whole success and strength of English cricket. They're only going to care that the bit that they own is good. So that's the 100. So you'd imagine they're going to be pushing pretty quickly for a full proper window, no overlapping with the Test summit, and then that can then expand. Do you think that they're going to push for a full home and away fixture, and then if 2 more teams get added, all of a sudden could you, or not all of a sudden, but in a few years' time, is it possible to think of the English summers actually having July and August just blocked out for the 100 because that's what these people who have all the money and therefore the power want? Or am I kind of being a bit sort of, catastrophizing about the whole thing?
I think it's well explained though as well. And I think that is the great unknown, right?
I guess the ECB's response to that would be to say that that's the reason that they're selling stakes in the teams and not selling the competition, because they will retain control over the competition. They will retain control over player signing mechanisms, all that sort of thing. They'll retain control over the fixture list. And much as owners can obviously push for things, they're signing a contract. They know what they're signing up for. And what we've seen so far, generally, take the IPL, for example. I'm always surprised that the IPL hasn't already become much bigger and longer than it is. It's basically, it's a little bit longer now than it used to be. But if you compare it to 2010, it's, I think, same number of teams, because they had a couple of early expansion teams, and pretty much the same number of games as it was 13, 14 years ago, because the BCCI are in a different position. They have more cash than the ECB. The ECB is still a rich board, but in the grand scheme of things, but they have control over the competition, and they've said this is how long the IPL is. You can want it to be longer if you want, but tough. This is what's going on.
Yeah, and I've been surprised myself, but also relieved, but not relieved from the position of being a sort of crusty old internationalist cricket lover, but from the point of, if you drag that tournament out any longer, then it loses so much of its rhythm and potency, I think. The repetitious element of 20-over cricket is a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, you know when it's coming out, you know how long it's going to last, and you can set your disappointment to view if that's your thing. But on the other, the sameness is such that it can all bleed into one if you're not careful, and so the IPL's done well, I think, to probably recognise that and not actually strain every single last bit of lifeblood from the thing. All I'd say, I guess, from the franchise's points of view, is that they've kind of, by stealth, expanded their empires anyway, right? Pal Royals or whatever they're called, and, they've got their tentacles into
But they would Rajasthan would be making more money.
Can tell you a place from.
They would be making more money if that team was based in Rajasthan and for 4 months of the year. So there has been, I think there has been some element of resistance towards franchises. Clearly, things are a little bit out of control at the moment in terms of lack of regulation around the world. But at the moment, there has been some precedent, at least, for a wealthy board saying to wealthy franchise owners, sorry, this is how we're doing things. And, central contracts and match fees are a lot in English cricket. I don't think yet we're in a position where, Mumbai Indians, London are going to say we have to have Ollie Pope rested from the third test next week because we need him fresh for the first game against Trent Knight Riders. I can't see it anytime soon, personally, given how much Pope's central contract is worth. But
that was another thing that the IPL did cleverly initially, and they've retained this, at least officially, that international boards have control over their players, and they are invitees, they are guests of the IPL, and we know where the kind of the supremacy lies, or whatever. I think you're right that English cricket has a lot in its favour. It has reasonably deep coffers comparatively, and they pay their big stars a lot of money. And again, circular discussion, going back to the Stokes thing, do you mind playing a few games, Ben? Well, I think that's a reasonable question to ask, considering the size of the central contracts that the best players can garner. And so yeah, I don't see the inevitable private investment necessarily encroaching on the crown jewel stuff immediately, but then sport is a sort of case study in venture capitalism getting its claws in and then tearing apart something that it once claimed to want to protect and nurture. So look, it's fraught with danger. My overall feeling on it is that it's inevitable, and it's the natural direction of travel. As soon as you sprang this tournament up, it was interesting. I thought that Gould basically admitted that to Atherton in that interview.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
And said, we weren't, perhaps, this was before his time, of course, so perhaps he can say it with a bit more freedom, but he said, well, we weren't exactly honest with the cricketing public, that we could have perhaps been a slightly more candid, or however he put it. But that's interesting, I think, in itself, that that it's always been the intention. And anyone who's watched the thing play out, it's round the corner. Of course, it's round the corner. Does this result in the death knell of English cricket, or does it actually enable a bit more money to come into it, which, if it's used sensibly by the ECB, does filter down into areas that are desperate for it? And I'm not just talking about counties number 16, 17 and 18. I'm talking about your club on a Saturday that can't afford to keep the show on the road, you know, and another club merges with another club in the town up the road from where you are. It impacts on the whole game. And, you know, look, people can say, well, they've drained a lot of money out of the game because of the 100. And if it had been used elsewhere, then we wouldn't be in this position. And that's a fair argument to have. But we are in that position. We are where we are. And so for me, horrifying as it is for an old-fashioned lefty to say it, you've got to open those doors and let the big beasts come in.
Also, I think there is a natural tendency in English cricket to be a bit anxious about it, but I do think, from just a very simple sort of branding point of view, I think a lot of people, you know, the IPL is quite popular in the UK. A lot of English cricket fans watch the IPL, and while some of them hate it and some of them are cynical about it, a lot of people watch it and enjoy it. And I think, you know, what is cooler as a brand identity? Northern Superchargers sponsored by Pop Chips, or Northern Knight Riders wearing the gold helmets with Shah Rukh Khan in the hospitality suite, potentially. I think from a sheer branding point of view, I think there will be a lot of people in the UK who will find the second one significantly more attractive and exciting.
Yeah.
And even if it is a bit identikit in a global sense, they will be more interested by that. And the possibility of seeing some top overseas players, if they can, they already have them. But
and that, if there is a silver bullet anywhere in this, it is persuading Rishabh Pant to go and play in the Northeast, right? Because if you're looking for something that changes the game, the economic landscape overnight, and it's all TV rights these days in cricket, then that is incomprehensible, the effect that would have on the tournament and on the ECB's bargaining power and on the ECB's future financial health, really. Mad as it is that it can hinge on a handful of names, but that is how it works. You know, you see it with on a very, very much lower level. You see it with the county streams, right? You know, that when there is when Sai Sudarshan plays, who's a 21-year-old lad who's maybe played one or two ODIs, possibly at most, and he turns out for Surrey, their numbers go through the roof because people are waking up in India and going, oh, well, we'll watch one of our own. And I totally understand that. You know, if I was an Indian cricket fan, I'd be keeping my eye out for that. So that, if there is a silver bullet anywhere, I've always felt that it wouldn't live and die by the quality of its overseas, but it'll go a long way to helping justify this thing. And as of now, there's not been an Indian male cricketer in it that I can think of.
Well, the BCI have their blanket ban on their men's cricketers playing in overseas T20 leagues, which is why you have the slightly odd situation where, you know, you've got Venkatesh Iyer and Ajinkya Rahane and Prithvi Shaw all playing in the One Day Cup while the 100's going on. We've spent a lot of time talking about the 100 off the field. Obviously, you know, we touched on Pollard and the sixes, but Phil, your moment of the week is also from the 100.
Is it? Phil's moment of the week is from the 100, apparently. Nicholas Pooran's 113-metre monster out of Old Trafford. Genuinely, my actual moment is that game on Saturday afternoon, because I was watching that, I was covering that properly. It seems almost a bit kind of reductive to just talk about the cricket, but there's some good cricket that creeps out. Absolutely there is. Southern Brave have got a really, really good, very watchable cricket team. A really good, diverse team, you know, with Vince kicking off up top alongside Alex Davis, who's a brilliant sort of pinch hitter-like player, brilliant keeper as well. And they've got like this fabulous seam attack with Jordan, Samal Mills, Jofra's back, bowling fast. And Pollard's in there as well. I've missed out a name there. I've missed out one of the quicks. Jordan.
Craig Overton's been there.
And Overton as well, yeah, who's you know, a very good cricketer. So, you know, they're good to watch. They're a very, very good side to watch. And so that Pollard heist, my actual moment. But, you know, it's fine to acknowledge in the gaps that these bits of genius, these bits of brilliance creep out. And Vince himself has been the star of the show. Every time I turn it on, he played one shot the other day. Sorry. It was off a quick. Oh, it's gone. Shame.
Side of the ground type of shot.
It was a pull shot through straight mid wicket against a quick bowling quick. But anyway, it's great that Vince is the star of the show. He's been the standout player throughout it in the men's side.
Matt, do you want to pick out one thing you've enjoyed in the 100 from a cricket point of view?
Can I do one in each comp quickly? Yeah. Two very impressive all-rounders. In the women's comp, Annabelle Sutherland, I think everyone knew she was good, but I think I've probably massively woken up to just how good she is, age 22 over the past 3 weeks. I think she's something like fifth highest run scorer and second highest wickets. She had a game here at the Oval actually probably just over a week ago now, where she just, I think, hit the stumps 4 times in 6 balls or something like that right near the end to win it, having scored a load of runs already. Looked really stylish, but also really powerful with the bat. Just had that sort of crispness off the middle where I thought this is a proper player. And then in the men's, Sam Curran has been fantastic. I think I left the T20 World Cup in June thinking I can see how Curran and Livingston might be the two sort of statement droppings next time England play white ball cricket, where they're both binned off. They were sort of the attempt to revitalise the post 2019 team. They've started well. They've both regressed a little bit in the past couple of years. Livingston's done very little in the 100, but Curran has been phenomenal, really. Particularly with the bat, really, because with the ball he's done well, but nothing sort of. I don't think we've learned too much about him. He bowls some nice lower balls. He gets his Yorkers in more often than not at the end. But with the bat, he is shown. I think the power has been the main thing, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with Sam Curran. But just looking at his numbers, he's hit 4 fours in the whole competition and 17 sixes, which does show, the scale of the fact that he's been a proper powerful hitter through the middle as well. And I think it does, I now think he probably will be in England's T20 squad against Australia in September. And I also think there's a growing case to say that maybe he should be in primarily as a batter as well, because I'm trying to think, Duckett probably won't play at least the first game because he'll be with the test squad. How many left-handers are there that you can think of that should bat in England's top 5 outside of Sam Curran? May arguably Dan Mosley, but probably not. He's not had a great comp. Bethel's probably more of a finisher now. So I can see how Curran would end up in that side, even as a number potentially 4, maybe 5, if not. But used in a very different role to what we've seen him in international cricket before, where in T20s in particular, he's looked out of his depth with the bat at the end, but he looks really good at the moment.
Well, mate, the Wisden Podcast carriage marked Sam Curran in the top 5 has been left the station ages ago, so you'll have to jump on the back of that. No, absolutely, I totally agree with you. On the women's side of things, so many good young spinners, good English spinners coming through. We know, say, the top 3 who are playing for England, but there's a load coming through. I'm not necessarily saying that they would ever usurp them, but there's just quality throughout. I saw it on Saturday night. I did that game as well when Elise Perry's Phoenix side beat Welsh Fire and turned them over. Brilliant fielding performance. Katie Levick, who I've interviewed before, she's a really good character from Yorkshire. She bowled sort of achingly slowly and got Jess Jonathan out with a kind of an arm ball, I would say. But she was good and brave at the death. Hannah Baker bowled very well. Courtine Coleman,
Courtine Coleman.
Tilly Courtine, 16 years old.
I think she's born 07.
She bowls like Eccleston, actually. Quite tall, left arm, gives it a bit of flight as well as darts. Nerveless, clearly fancies it.
There's also Sophia Smale here, who has great celebrations.
Right.
I
haven't seen her.
She's quite a good. She's left arm spin as well.
Right.
But I think I've seen her take a couple of catches where she properly lets rip, particularly when they're off her own bowling.
Nice.
Just again looks like a great character, as you say. So yeah, I think. And I think also it's easy to forget how big a stage the 100 is for some of the domestic players. It's huge.
The jeopardy on these games is so much more, and so it's a more engaging contest day by day. I find far more engaging because there is that sense that everyone's desperate to be there, and you don't always get that sense with the men's competition.
There'll be much more discussion on the Women's 100 on the Wisden Women's Cricket Week podcast, which is out later this week. And now we'll hear from Mark Butcher on just why batting has been so hard in the 100 this year and on who he thinks should replace Matthew Mott as England white ball coach. Hi Butch, good to chat. You've seen a lot of the 100, maybe more than anyone, and we were just talking about what it's been like sort of watching it on TV, competing with the Olympics, that sort of thing. But kind of how's it felt in the ground? Has it still felt as kind of, I don't know, vibrant and as exciting for the crowds who are in, or has it felt a bit different, do you think?
I think it's depended very much on the games, really. I mean, we've had a lot of games whereby the ball has dominated the bat by quite some margin, and given the makeup of the audience, which is still very young, and that's great. That's been fantastic. There were hordes of youngsters sort of yelling Phoenix chants last night at Edgbaston. You kind of, they're not going to sort of be appreciative of the bowler and the wicketkeeper having a game on their own as the ball keeps flying past the outside edge. They want to see a little bit more action. There's been multiple records around the traps, at Trent Bridge, at Leeds, at Manchester, at the Oval for women's games. So that continues to grow in popularity as people, decide that they're going to turn up to watch the women, not the women's game specifically, but turn up and watch the women's game perhaps before the men's game, or the fans of the women's game solely, and that is a good thing. There have been some quieter crowds, some smaller crowds. I think Edgbaston was sort of 11,000, I think, for the men's game, and we were getting numbers in the women's 100 at the venues that I've mentioned, which were a sort of 11,500 for the women's game only before the men's game started. So that was a little bit underwhelming last night. But in the main, the product is the cricket, and at times the cricket hasn't been particularly joyous. Given some slightly dodgy or difficult surfaces to play on, and some very, very fine bowling attacks. I mean, there's some last night with Milne and Southey with the ball hooping around and seaming and bouncing was a proper challenge. So there are multiple factors as to why it hasn't had the same sort of impact. Simply because you've had quite a large proportion of games, not all of them, but quite a large proportion of the games where the ball has dominated to a degree that has made it less of a spectacle to the audience that you're selling it to, which is a younger fan base who want to see the ball flying out the park, or at least have that excitement of seeing the big hits as well as the stumps fly.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the surfaces, because there's been a lot of talk about the ball. I mean, Moeen says he wants the ball changed. There's talk that it's like the H itself on the ball is making it swing more or something, and that they just can't deal with it. But you think that's like it's not just that, if that's a factor.
Well, it never is. I mean, but simply because I've seen games where sort of 160 has played 160, and the surfaces were good. So you get of course you get a little bit of movement. The ball itself, it looks as though the seam is a little bit more sort of proud than it might be on the old white kookaburra. But as far as the rest of it's concerned, it's pretty much the same. And the issue, I think, has been for the pitches where the ball has really dominated, has been a sort of almost like a carpet layer of what looks like almost like sort of dead grass sitting on top of the hard surface of the pitch, which is kind of absorbing the impact of the ball. The seam is gripping on it, and it's making it. You've got swing, which is absolutely fine and great, and it should happen for a short period of time in the white ball game. But you've also got the fact that the ball then doesn't get old, because what it's hitting on the surface, this sort of carpety layer of thick, almost like dead grass on top, is cushioning the ball, so it doesn't get old. So what you would get you would expect for maybe 30 balls or something in a white ball game continues right the way through, and it's made it very, very difficult for batting on those surfaces. But again, I've seen games at Headingley and Manchester where the pitches have been excellent, and you've had exciting cricket. The ball has still done a little bit for the bowlers at the beginning, but sort of scores 150, 160, lots of 4s and 6s, and that's being played with the same ball. So, as I always say, look at what's happening on the ground before you sort of come up with wild conspiracy theories about H's on balls, making them go all over the place.
Yeah, and I mean, as much as that has, it's been a lower scoring tournament overall than we're kind of been used to seeing in modern T20 cricket. That's made it interesting actually from a proper cricket perspective at a time when England could do with finding out about some players if they're going to, regenerate in white ball cricket. I think the fact that it's harder to bat means it separates sort of the guys who can do it and score runs quickly against in conditions when it's a bit tougher against good bowling from the guys who maybe are building up records against slightly weaker bowling attacks and that sort of thing. Who are the guys who have impressed you so far from an England men's point of view, at least?
Outside of the ones that you already know, Jacob Bethel has looked like a very, very good player. I mean, full stop, regardless of the format, just has that certain it where the way he moves, the positions he gets himself into. He obviously has the power that modern players need as well. And he looks like a great athlete and a really, really fine player. Jordan Cox's stock has gone up as far as I'm concerned. He's already been selected for England and may well play instead of Ben Stokes if they decide to sort of jettison the balance of the team and pick an out-and-out batter at 6. Matty Hurst at Manchester Originals, out of nowhere, really. I mean, I saw him at the beginning of the year play some really combative innings in the Championship in a struggling Lancashire side, and had no inkling from watching that he was, he had the sort of the range of stroke and the power that he does, given the opportunity to bat at the top of the order. So that's been a bit of an eye opener. But beyond that, just simply because of the fact that you've had so many lower scoring games, there hadn't been a massive amount of batters who have kind of really, really stood out. But those three, I think, in my mind, are kind of like, guys who've done themselves no end of good. And of course, then, Sam Curran has sort of rediscovered his mojo again. And the extraordinary thing with him is that, that sort of when the confidence is high, it just seems like he'll take wickets and hit 6s for fun, and he seems to be right in the midst of a resurgence and a purple patch, which is great to see. So much so that, given Stokes' injury, you could almost sort of say, well, if they don't want to tamper with the balance of that Test side against Sri Lanka next week, then plug him in at 6 and have him be your 4th seamer, and then the rest of the lineup and England's ability to sort of have enough bowling to take 20 wickets as well as a deep batting lineup doesn't change, and so that would be an extraordinary turnaround of fortune for him. But other than that, we've seen some magnificent bowling. John Turner was quite impressive last night. It's the first time I've seen him live, seen him on the TV before. And he had a real sort of snap of the ball out of the hand. Matty Potts has gone well. Again, you sort of, the same conversation that you have around the batters is similar for the bowlers, in that they've had quite a lot go their way in terms of conditions. And so then it becomes difficult to sort of judge who the best guys are out of the pack. But I think we've always known that Potts has a lot of the attributes that would make a very good long form bowler anyway, and that he's great control of line, great control of length, and he's just about quick enough to be able to knock people over. So he's another one that's had a decent competition.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up John Turner, because he had the worst possible start to his season this year. In his first games, first 2 balls were both beamers, and then he had to be whipped from the attacks, having bowled no legal balls but gone for, I think, 5 runs, which is not ideal.
Yes. No, he was impressed with him last night. I mean, given that as well, that he, there was no sort of sign of the yips last night at Edgbaston. So good on him, and he looks to have the sort of attributes that England will be looking at going forward.
In terms of regeneration, obviously they're also looking for a new coach, and because we've obviously been talking about all these names, and you end up bringing up the biggest names in world cricket. And I was wondering, like, is it definitely still as attractive a job as it has been? Because if you say you're an IPL coach, You only have to work 8 weeks of the year, presumably you get paid pretty well, and it feels like it comes with perhaps less of the scrutiny that comes with being, an England international coach, where you have, so much media focus.
In England, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
in India, the pressure on that is, it's like managing Manchester United or something, looking after one of those franchises. So from the outside, it might appear that way. I just think if your job is coaching, I think the not only the kudos, the pay will be excellent, and the challenge of world competitions in white ball cricket for England is something that you'd absolutely have to look at. Maybe some of the older guys, obviously the Stephen Flemings of this world and whatever, are kind of at a stage in their lives where perhaps they don't, they don't need it. But there are lots of guys who are making their way or sort of getting to that point of being, renowned coaches for whom it would be an incredible opportunity. The depth of talent in English cricket at the moment in the white ball game. I mean, they've been disappointing in 2 World Cups on the bounce, but you still look down at the list of players that they've had to pick from over the course of that and say, well, surely I'd be able to make a difference in with that. Plus the fact that there are, the guys coming up on the rails who are also extremely talented and good to work with. So I don't buy that at all. I just think the package would need to be right and a certain amount of flexibility as well in terms of sort of the time away from home and all the rest of it. But I don't see that being an issue in terms of trying to attract somebody to the job. I think it's still, if I was in the coaching game, that would be an extremely attractive gig, I think.
And there's a lot of names that have been thrown about. Are there any sort of names who haven't been as much in the conversation that you think should be, and also who just would be your pick? Who do you think they should be considering, basically?
Yeah, I mean, a name came up last night actually in Vikram Solanki, who's been at Gujarat for the last couple of years. Is rumoured that there might be some sort of a change happening there in terms of their backroom staff and whatever. But he also might be in line to come back to the Oval and be the sort of director of cricket there. Andy Flower's name's been mentioned. There's been all kinds of sort of possible candidates sort of put up. I would sort of shy away from going backwards to somebody like Flower, despite his incredible CV of success around the world with franchise teams. I would think it would be unlikely that they would go backwards in that regard. And so, I haven't got a long list of people that I think would be up for the job, but I do think that the best option, which is something that I thought way back in the midst of time before, Baz came over and turned around England's Test fortunes, was to have the same guy do both, with that flexibility that you have. A deputy that you could hand over certain tours or certain periods of time to, because I still feel, and I felt it at the time and I feel it now, that having a split coaching system inevitably leads to comparisons, favourable or otherwise, with the guy that's doing the other job. You've got enough players who play in both formats for any sort of change of messaging to kind of like to feel as though, well, we prefer the way this guy does it. And so that would be, if I had the money and the checkbook and had the power to make that call, I'd be on the phone to Baz and saying, look, is there a way that we can work this that works for you and works for us? And obviously you'd have to pay him very well to do it, but I still think that that's the best option. I thought it then, I still think it now.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I guess also you look at some of the guys in the Test team, you think actually those could be brilliant 50-over players. Like obviously Zach Crawley's done it a little bit, captain in the Ireland series. Ollie Pope as well looks like he could be, like, he has the tools to be that kind of middle order sort of guy you build an innings around. But these guys don't get to play much white ball cricket. So who's going to know if they're best suited for that than the Test coach, basically? Yeah,
potentially. I mean, so you talk about sort of emerging players. Well, I mean, he's not emerging. He's England's Test opener, but Ben Duckett has also been brilliant in the 100 as well. And again, I thought there was a huge opportunity to get him into that T20 side during the World Cup, given some of the conditions that he played in the middle order, over somebody like Johnny Bairstow, who's batting out of his preferred position at the top of the order and was kind of less effective because of that. So I mean, I totally agree that you're not picking a test team, but what you do have is an insight into these players, and they're already playing in a manner in which and in a regime under which they feel comfortable to be completely themselves, and what would be better than to have the same guy with the same messaging across both formats with largely the same group of players. How would it work? So I mean, Baz is in the country for much of the English summer anyway. And England haven't been overburdened with white ball stuff during the course of this summer. It's only towards the back end that they're going to play, and then you'd make your choices around which overseas trips would be the ones that you'd kind of go, okay, well, you sit this one out and we'll have your deputy kind of look after things there. But the messaging and the view on players would be the same across the board, and I think that's extremely important.
Well, cheers, Butch. Thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of the 100.
I will. One game left for me, and then it's a long build up of test preparation.
Good, as we all need. Matt, England sacked Matthew Mott a while ago now, but you were out there for that World Cup for his last engagement as England coach. Did you see it coming, and do you think it's the right decision?
I actually had the very strange experience after the semi-final in Guyana of being the only member of the English press pack at that game due to some quite dull logistical reasons. But I ended up doing Matthew Mott's what proved to be his final interaction with the English press pack, which was me doing some of my own questions and then reading a few out off my phone in a sort of AstroTurf gazebo in Providence Stadium, where in the room was me, Matthew Mott, Danny, the England media manager, and Yasser, the England security
Bloody
guy.
Hell.
So that was a very strange experience. I did ask him at the time whether he thought he was the man to take England forward, and he said, yep, I feel like we've made good progress. I wasn't hugely surprised when the news filtered through, partly because it had sort of been talked about incessantly really for 2 or 3 weeks since England's elimination. But I think that there had to be some kind of change, either Butler as captain or Mott as coach. Personally, I think the brave decision would have been to get rid of Butler as captain. I think that Mott is probably a better coach than Butler is captain personally right now, based on particularly what I saw in the Caribbean.
If they had done that, who would have been your captain just briefly?
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because it can't be Brook at the moment,
right?
Because of the schedules, and Sam Curran probably not nailed on in both formats, so there's not really an answer. So it's easy for me to say in isolation that I would have booted Butler, but I don't think there's an obvious successor, so he sort of clings on. I suppose the counter argument to that is, as we saw with the test team, there's always someone. People made exactly the same argument with Joe Root for the last year of his reign, saying, well, it has to be Root because he's the only one who's nailed on in the team. It can't be Stokes because of all the stuff going on around Stokes, and look what's happened in the last 2 years. But I wasn't hugely surprised. I think it's easier to find a new coach than it is to find a new captain.
That's it, isn't it?
Also, England need Butler more than Butler needs England, is the brutal honesty. Butler's won both World Cups. He's achieved so much in international cricket already. If he retired tomorrow, he could do so knowing that he's had a very good run and can rake it in franchise cricket for 5+ years. So I think, I'm not hugely surprised that the outcomes, but I do think it's an interesting time with the coach because clearly Trescothick's got the interim job for September, and then past that there's a lot of people who seem like good candidates, but in most cases there's a reason why, either something that would count against them, or probably more pertinently there's a reason why they wouldn't want it, because they already have either TV or franchise gigs that are probably a lot more comfortable than
so come on then.
Sangakkara is one of those who hasn't, he's not said he definitely wants it, but when asked about it, he didn't rule himself out. Could he be in the frame?
Well, writing in the magazine that went to print last week, I plumped for him. Why not?
It makes
vibes,
sense, doesn't it?
Vibes, beautiful hair, the silverest tongue in the game.
I think two of the most relevant bits about it are based in the UK and has worked with Butler for 3 years.
Yeah, they get on well. Yeah,
that makes an obvious reason why he would be a candidate, because a lot of other guys,
I think deep down he'd really want it. necessarily think he'd give that away, but I think he'd really want it. And somewhere in the mix, I think he'd be very energised by the idea of sliding into one of the really big jobs. So yeah, as you say, the thing with Butler's kind of got this sort of big Joss IPL energy, isn't he? But it doesn't seem to always transmit into the England job, which looks like it gets him down a little bit. And Mott's press conferences were sometimes quite sort of edgy, taciturn affairs. Sangakkara would step up quite comfortably and, you know, would talk the press back inside out anyway, and he'd have them out the palm of his hand. Crucially, he would be a very tender lover to his charges until he'd have to drop one, and then he'd just, you know, embark on one of his soliloquies and then settle back on his sort of unimpeachable credentials, and you can't really argue with it. Just as McCullum's come in there and done something on the edges of things, you know, and it's vibes and fumes and a sense of something. Well, obviously, Sangakkara would bring something else. But bottom line, as you say, him and Butler get on great, and Butler was to be asked, he'd say, yeah, he'd be my man. And so maybe as they have kept him on, Butler, maybe throw him all the support he'd need.
I guess the counter is Sangakkara is probably going to be it seems a little bit good cop as a pair, that, and it doesn't necessarily seem like there would be huge disagreements, I think, and maybe that's absolutely fine. You don't want a captain and coach going at each other, but I feel like Butler had a lot of power and a lot of influence in the team in the past little while, which hasn't necessarily worked. So, you know, the strange thing is that by getting rid of Mott and keeping Butler, you've arguably empowered him even more than he was before, even though I always thought that he was the more influential in that partnership. Does he, you know, do you want a slightly different balance where you get maybe someone who's very detailed focused, like Mike Hesson, for example, or Mike Hussey? Those are two slightly different coaches. I think Hussey's probably a bit more vibes than Hesson, but Hesson is a sort of very detailed guy who has had some success in franchise cricket, won the PSL last year. He obviously did very well with a New Zealand team that was, you know, he seemed to have quite a good relationship with McCullum and Williamson.
Don't you think that what McCullum's done in Test cricket kind of blows the notion of, you know, clipboards and data and all of that? Not blown it out the water, but kind of shown cricketers to be simple, lovable beasts.
When he took over England's Test team, you had a group of sort of players who were sort of cowed and playing with themselves and not realising their potential, and they did need sort of an attitude change. I don't know if it's the same issue with white ball cricket, or actually if it is more of a tactical details guy. Yeah,
lack of attention to it. So, like, a great example of that is that game in Guyana where Mott the day before was saying, well, all our research has said that it's low bounce here, it's slow and low, it's unique conditions, you probably do need to do things differently, everything's on the table selection wise. And then they picked exactly the same team with 4 spinners in it and chased and didn't bowl Moeen Ali, and it all seemed a bit too, we don't want to upset anyone, we don't want to have a difficult conversation with Sam Curran or Chris Jordan or whoever it would have been that would have been left out, and bring Duckett in or Hartley in, because what if it goes wrong? It might look silly. Whereas I almost feel like there is that attention to detail that might have been missing almost in the white ball setup. But I don't know. I think McCullum has been a very good coach, but I think there's more than one way to skin a cat. We've seen with Dravid. Dravid is more of a details guy. Yeah. Dravid would be a great appointment. He won't do it, but
who?
Dravid. Yeah. He'd never do it.
Flower.
The question is whether he wants it, isn't it? Because I think he's a great candidate. I think there's very little overlap with the team that he would have left in 14. And he's clearly quite a changed style of coach, even if he's not. I don't think he's gone full other way, but it's clearly just a different gig when you're in a franchise environment. But he's won everything. I guess the question is just whether he wants to, probably sacrifice quite a lot of money and a bit of home time by doing that job.
Because he's very in demand now, isn't he? And he's got a lot of good gigs around the world. But yeah, it would be intriguing. Mark Ramprakash, writing in the magazine, got full square behind Flower. I think Atherton and Hussain both said he appears on paper to be the outstanding candidate.
But it's one of those, it's like, people are talking about the next England football manager and people are saying, well, Jurgen Klopp's the outstanding candidate, but then Klopp sort of laughs in their face and says, why would I want to do that? And I sort of feel like maybe Flower's in the same position. I don't know.
Yeah.
We've had one test match played this week. It wasn't a classic. It was a rain-affected draw between South Africa and West Indies, but it was notable for one specific reason. In terms of tests played in between games, this was the longest stretch in test history between two draws. So you had 28 tests between this draw and the last draw, which was also at the same ground between West Indies and India last year. So it was just over 400 days between the two draws. And
what was it?
It's the longest stretch in terms of time in 74 years since 1950. It's also only the second time that consecutive draws have been at the same venue between a different pair of teams. So how's that for a stat?
Be still my beating heart, Ben. And the ground was Trinidad, was it?
Queen's Park Oval. Yeah. I went to Queen's Park Oval on a day off in Port of Spain in June, and they have in the museum a lump of turf from, you remember this one, Phil, a drawn test there in, I think, the 09 series, or 2010. 09 it would have been, I think.
West Indies rolled England in the first game, and there were 4 massively high-scoring draws. For the rest of the
was
series.
roads for the rest of the series, and they have a bit of turf there, and I don't think I've ever, obviously it's not been in the ground for 15 years, but it just looks like a rock, honestly. You could have told me it was the foundation stone of Queen's Park Cricket Club, and I'd have believed you.
The One Day Cup is still in progress. One round of games left until the playoff spots are decided. In Group A, Somerset are through, but then it's a bit of a shootout for that second and third spot, which are on 10 points, Durham on 9, Hampshire and Derbyshire on 8. Remember, only the top 3 go through in that. And in Group B, so there's a big game between Leicestershire and Gloucestershire who play each other. So Gloucestershire on 8 points, Leicestershire on 10 points. Leicestershire's net run rate lower than Gloucestershire's because they've had a lot of very close wins. If Gloucestershire win that, they would almost certainly be through as an outside chance for Yorkshire as well. But Matt, your moment of the week is from the One Day Cup.
It is, yeah. I made the trip down. I got a lift down from my dad actually to Taunton to watch Somerset pretty comprehensively beat Worcestershire in what was quite an important game in that group. But yeah, my dad grew up watching the great Somerset teams of the 70s and 80s, and I grew up watching the maybe not quite as great, but pretty strong teams in the sort of Trescothic, Butler, Keys-Vetter, Hildreth type era, Peter Trigo. So yeah, always love going down to Taunton for a day out in the sunshine with my dad.
What did you talk about when it wasn't about cricket?
It was mainly about cricket, but a bit about life in general as well. A bit about his memories of coming to Taunton. Always good stuff.
Beautiful.
And yeah, it's Somerset, I think, have lost 10 or 11 players maybe to the 100, and yet still top of that group, and they just keep churning out young players, thanks partly to the private schools in the area, like Archie Vaughan, who's at Millfield.
So he was run out without facing non-striker's end.
Yeah, but he actually had a pretty good game. He's sort of he's pretty tall, I would say, sort of willowy middle order bat at the moment. He bowled a bit of off spin and had a lovely, I think it was the Fateh Singh, right, who used to play for England under 19 as a left-hander. He just bowled him from around the wicket, hit top of off.
Nice.
And then hit about 30 not out off about 20 balls at the end. Was at the non-striker's end when Ben Green hit the winning runs, and yeah, Somerset march on towards a home semi-final.
And children of 05, Rocky Flintoff, yeah, struck 80-odd, 88, I think it was, in his third or fourth game for Lancs.
Caught by Josh de Keres.
Really?
Son of Atherton.
That's nice. It's a game riddled with nepotism, isn't it, this one? or maybe replenished and deepened.
Or maybe some very good genes, to be fair.
Yeah. Great stuff.
For the English Test Summer, Wisden Cricket Monthly has some excellent offers for both print and digital customers. We've got a brand new monthly subscription option for print subscribers, and to make this even better, if you follow the link, which will be in the description of the podcast, and use the code WCM Free 24, so that's Wisden Cricket Monthly, Wisden Cricket Weekly, free FREE 24, you can get your first issue of this monthly offer for free. For digital subscribers, if you follow the link, you'll be able to purchase your first issue for 99p, moving onto the regular year-long subscription at £23.99. And with both offers running until the conclusion of the England-Sri Lanka Test Series, there's plenty of time to get your cricket fix at the best price possible. And links to both those offers will be in the bio of this podcast. Phil, new mag's out. Is it a good one? What's in it?
Yeah, one of the better ones. Yeah.
Feel like you often say that?
Often say it, don't often mean it. do mean it, yeah. I like magazines. I like the magazines that we do that don't have an obvious centerpiece. right? So they're not a themed thing. It's just a collection of good stuff. And so it kind of brings all of it through. The quality of the writing is superb, really, from top to bottom. Top of my head, things that jump out. Rob Smythe, who's been doing this fabulous series, Mining for Gold, where he gets really, really deep into the data and the numbers from yesteryear to pull out new fascinating tidbits about players and games and histories and so on. And this time round, he's coined Athball, right? 1994, the Oval, the Devon Malcolm game, Atherton captain, and for one mad, wild week, English cricket loses all of its shackles. And obviously Malcolm bowls like the wind and takes 9 for, but Gooch goes out, smashes 33 and 20 to kick the chase off. They're behind in the game before Malcolm does his thing, and then they rattle home, going at 6s and 7s in the 4th innings. Hick makes a run a ball 80 not out. Even Atherton himself climbs in and so on. And for 1 week, they're all Bazball prototypes, and then obviously it reverts to type after that. But Rob's done a brilliant comic piece as well, picking all that apart. The Gooch story in itself is fascinating because he was reaching the end of his time as England's best player at that point. He was 40 odd, if not already, and he dropped a catch in one of the early games, and he was going to quit. He was going to retire, and he was talked out of it to play that final game of the summer. And despite feeling like his race was run, he still went out and just took Donald to the cleaners for half an hour, 33 and 20. So he's done a really lovely piece on that. Daniel Gallen, excellent, increasingly excellent Daniel Gallen on South Africa's sort of troubled transformation, not policy, but the challenges that they've had to implement it, if you like. Particularly good there. I interviewed Nicholas Brooks, actually. I think we might maybe get him on the show next week, who won the Wisden Cricket Book of the Year and the MCC Cricket Book of the Year last year for his book on Sri Lankan cricket. Has done a really good bit of work on their quicks coming through, their battery of quicks, some of which you'll see in the next couple of weeks. I interviewed Gus Atkinson and Mark Wood, not together, because one of them was about to get on a plane to go to a villa in the south of France. The other one was picking up the bairns from his mum and dad's. So it wasn't together. But they both spoke brilliantly, actually, about the nature of fast bowling and what they see in each other as well, and whether we are seeing the emergence of potentially, a new fast bowling pairing that kind of out with the old. The king is dead, long live the kings. And what Atkinson did last month was objectively ridiculous, really. 22 wickets, 12 for at Lords, and Wood bowled like the clappers, bowled the fastest over in recorded English Test match history, and then bowled an even quicker one the next over after that. So that was good fun. But my favourite bit is my bit, and I interviewed Danny Wyatt, who's probably my top 5 favourite cricketers in England. She's just one of your own. She's absolutely brilliant. Much underrated, curiously unheralded. She's 30 games away from becoming the most capped English female cricketer in history. So by this time next year, she'd have probably done it. Her greatness hides in plain sight. Top run scorer in the history of the 100, although I think Nat actually went past her last week, but those two are running neck and neck. Yeah, she booted down the door for what women's cricket could become with a 56-ball 100 at Canberra against Australia, just out of nowhere. She'd not even made a 50 before that tour, in 7 years of trying, and since then she's been just an extraordinary talent, really.
And also finally got those tests last year, which looked like it would be something that never happened, because she sort of skewed towards T20 rather than one day at one point.
It was her fiance, now wife, Georgie, who persuaded her to go for it, because she said to her, "What more do you want out of your career? You've won this and you've got 100 plus caps in that." And she said, "I wouldn't mind a test cap." She said, "Right, well, let's go and get one for you then. Let's work out how we do it." And so she tailored her game, spoke with John Lewis about how she could adapt her game, identified a potential role in that middle order as a sort of tempo changer at 6, and went out there and, as you say, made a 50 in her first whack. 2 more Test matches coming up this winter. She'll hope to be involved in that. And obviously a T20 World Cup coming up in a couple of months. She's just a brilliant character. And I love talking to her, and I loved writing it up. It's one of those rare, but as soon as you've done the interview, it's just written. It's just written already. You just got to just put it on a page for her. So she's great. Good magazine. Go and get it. All the fun of the fair.
And another plug for the women's podcast. There will be a clip from that Danny White interview played on that, so make sure you check that out.
Oh, right, this week. Oh, nice. Yeah, she's great.
2 sort of amusing bits to finish us off. The global T20 Canada reached a conclusion last week. And by the way, Matt, I mean, you watch a lot of T20 cricket. Is that one too far for you? And also, I can't work out the point of this kind of thing. Like, I watch it, no one's there. Kind of, I feel like I should know, but I don't really know how this is making money. Can you sort of shed any light on that?
Yeah, how good are the lawyers for this show? I think
non-existent, mate.
I think I was pretty surprised when I saw a clip from the Global T20 Canada this year when I was scrolling on Twitter. I think it was Gurbaz hitting a boundary, and they panned to the stands of, it's a field in the middle of nowhere. There were, a few rows of temporary seating which had very, very few people in them. And I thought, you're telling me that this league can afford to have tempted Shaheen Afridi away from his contract that was worth $100,000 for 4 weeks' work in the UK. And I don't know. I don't get it. It doesn't, the scores have been really low, which I think is because it's been played on a club ground in the middle of nowhere. It looks rubbish. I'm sure no one's really watching it. But maybe they are, and maybe I'm missing something. But
future media manager, I can see it. If the money's right, they'll fly you out there.
Name your prize.
Someone who also seems to not really get it is Shakib, who's Bangla Tigers Mississauga. Let's go with Bangla Tigers, I guess.
You tell me. Yeah.
They were eliminated because Shakib just basically couldn't be bothered to turn up for the toss for the Super Over. So that eliminator game was between his side and the Toronto Nationals. It was his side went into it 3rd place, Toronto Nationals 4th place. It was delayed due to rain, but then the umpire said, no, we can get in a Super Over, so come out for the toss. And Shakib said, nah, you're right, don't really fancy it. A statement from the competition said, the match referee explained the plausible consequences of the said action to the captain, and thereafter the umpire subsequently called off the match. Shakib's team were eliminated, and the Toronto Nationals went through to the next round.
I think that I don't know the rights and wrongs of that situation, but I do know that it somehow adds to the mysterious legend of Shakib Al Hassan.
Yeah.
It feels like if only he'd kicked the stumps out of the ground rather than. But that's a close second.
On that, we got a message or an email, I think, from someone saying on your idea from last week, Ben, about celebrating somebody's history while they're still able to hear it is quite a nice idea, actually. Shakib would be a good one to do, wouldn't he? Like, the life and loves of Shakib Al Hassan. That would be a fun episode to do. On that, incidentally, next week I'm going to talk about Bill Edrich, if I'm allowed on next week. I'm going to talk about Bill Edrich and nothing else. The Randy Mole, Bill Edrich.
The other bit of silly cricket was in a club game between West Breton CC and Nossal St Oswald CC. West Breton made 235 for 6, so Nossal St Oswald were chasing 236, and then with the scores level, so they made it 235 for 7. The Play Cricket scorecard notes that the game was abandoned due to the umpire saying it was too sunny. Apparently the sun had got too low in the sky, and the batters could no longer see adequately. Apparently they deemed it unsafe, and that was it. The game was called off.
That used to happen at Canterbury, didn't it? The sun would set.
Yeah, and Derby. Derby was another one because it used to shine off the car windscreens.
Old Trafford, when they turn the square around or before they turn the square around?
Yeah, this is good stuff. This will bring the kids in. This is good stuff, lads.
That is somehow all we've got time for. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Matt. And just Matt looks impeccable still. For what the viewers won't hear, hopefully listen to this. It's been an absolutely sweltering episode. It's the hottest day of the year. We've had to close the windows because they're mowing the lawn outside. Phil and I have about one button done up between us. And Matt looks completely.
I don't feel it.
and he's growing every time I see him. He's got another couple of inches.
yeah, he'll be his release height will get him on the next Ashes tour.
Cheers, Matt. Cheers, Phil. And if you did enjoy that, please give us a follow, a share, and just tell your friends.